And so, how far away? What are the chances of nuclear weapons happening? Now, I know Iran doesn't have them, but Israel does, and Israel also has the Samson option. Which do you think the Samson option is if they feel like they're at an existential threat of being annihilated as a state, that they will then nuke all the other big states or countries in the world and bring about the end times. Is that what the Samson option is? And do you think that there will be nuclear weapons used in this conflict?
Right. So the Samson option is only used if the state of Israel is threatened. And right now, the state of Israel is not threatened. In fact, okay, I know this is going to sound really weird, but the Iranians are doing the Israelis a favor by bombarding Tel Aviv. Right. So let me explain why. There are two centers of gravity in the state of Israel. There's Tel Aviv, which is the open, cosmopolitan, democratic Israel. It's the Ashkenazi Israel. It's a European Israel. Then you have Jerusalem, which is the conservative religious theocracy, right? So there's almost like a power struggle in Israel to determine the soul of the nation. And because the Iranians are bombarding Tel Aviv and not Jerusalem, this is forcing the Ashkenazi Jews, the European Jews, the liberal, democratic, cosmopolitan Jews to leave for Europe, which now makes Jerusalem the center of gravity in the state of Israel. So these religious fanatics in Israel believe that this war is actually good because it will make Israel much more theocratic. It will abandon its facade of Western democracy and just embrace its theocracy. And these religious Jews believe that that is what God wants. So I don't want to go too much into the theology. What they believe is that what they're trying to achieve the kingdom of David. Okay, and what does that mean? David had the best relationship with God because David was humble. David prayed to God every single day. And why David did that is because he suffered tremendous tragedy. He married Bathsheba, but Bathsheba already had a husband named Uriah the Hittite. So David had him assassinated. And that's a great crime against God. And then God punished David by killing David's son with Bathsheba. And that forced David to look into himself and recognize his own limitations and recognize the supremacy of God. So he redeemed himself, redemption, right? And that's what these religious extremists in Israel want to do. They want to create this war that shatters the illusion of Israel as a modern day democracy and force the Israeli Jews to redeem themselves in the eyes of God, to submit themselves fully to the power and embrace of God. And so I know we're saying this is that the people in charge of Israel have mapped this out, and it's going according to their plan.
Wow. So I mean, so who do you think? What do you think is going to be? How do you see this ending for the United States, Israel, Iran, and the Gulf states? I mean, even China and Russia. How do you see this ending?
Right. So again, there's an eschatological script in place, and we just assume the eschatological script is accurate. Okay, then certain things will happen. Okay, what will happen is this: America will launch a ground invasion of Iran, and to do that, they need a national draft. America may spend 5-10 years in Iran, and they will lose this war because America doesn't have the political will, the manufacturing capacity, the resilience to fight this war. This war, because of national draft, will ignite a civil war in the United States, right? So America is forced to retreat from the Middle East, close down all its bases, and America will be embroiled in a civil war for the next 5 to 10 years. Low intensity civil war, but a civil war nonetheless, which makes America incapable.
What would it look like?
Well, there are two movies that have come out in the past year that sort of tell us how it would look like. You know, one battle after another in civil war, right? So basically, the entire nation splinters into enclaves that fight each other. It's low intensity. You won't have armies march against each other, but it'll be impossible to govern a nation. You'll have sieges of New York City, of Boston. You'll have massive sectarian warfare between the left and the right. Minnesota, what happened in Minnesota in January is basically an appetizer. It'll be very complicated, but there'll be a lot of sectarian violence in America, which then forces America out of the world. America is forced to retreat back into the Western Hemisphere. Okay, so that's America. Once Iran and America are destroyed, the GCC is also destroyed in this war as well, because people don't appreciate how vulnerable the GCC is. GCC imports 89% of its food. It's a desert, so it needs to import food from other places. The desalination plants provide 60% of its water because it doesn't have organic fresh water supplies. And its knowledge workers are imported from the rest of the world. So if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, if their economies collapse, then their nations collapse as well. Okay, so the GCC, it is done. They're gone. They will wither back into the desert. So that's the GCC. Iran will be destroyed as a nation state. It will suffer from a lot of issues, like such as water scarcity, and a lot of Iranians will die in this war. So they will need time to build back. But in the long term, Iran will come back because this is Persia, and they have 3,000 years of civilization. And so these are really resilient and creative people. This war will enable Russia to complete its major military objective in Ukraine, which is the capture of Odessa. Okay? So imagine a year from now, a month from now, who knows? Okay? But America sends in ground troops into Iran. That means that America is now completely focused on Iran. That allows Russia to march against Odessa. The Europeans have to come in to reinforce Odessa. But the Europeans don't have the political will. They don't have the number of soldiers. They don't have the manufacturing capacity to fight this war. So this will cause civil conflict in Europe as well, which will lead to regime change in Germany, in Britain, in France. So Europe implodes, and Russia now controls Ukraine. According to this eschatology, this is really interesting. At this point, Russia and Israel will work together to divide up Turkey. The reason why is that sovereign Turkey is part of the Greater Israel Project. Okay, so Israel wants the south of Turkey, Anatolia. For the Russians, there's something called the Third Rome Prophecy, which is to say that Moscow will become the third Rome and rule over the Orthodox world. To do that, what they need to do, according to this eschatology, is return the Greeks to Constantinople, which is Istanbul. So in other words, perhaps Russia and Israel already have a deal in place to split up Turkey in the long term. Okay? China is actually not part of eschatology, which is say that the occultists who came up with this eschatology assume that China is forced to turtle up because of the geopolitical environment. So China's not really part of the equation. Then what Israel will do is create something called the Pax Judaica. All right. So the Pax Judaica is basically Jerusalem is the center of the world, and from Jerusalem, Israel is able to control trade and industry in Africa, in the Middle East, and it controls the Strait of Hormuz. It controls oil production in the Middle East, and therefore it's able to achieve AI, an AI surveillance state. So what they did in Gaza, they'll scale out to the rest of the Middle East. They will import laborers, tens of millions of laborers, in order to be the cheap labor of this Pax Judaica. These laborers will come from India, China, and the Philippines. Remember, before this war started, Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, went to Jerusalem and had a very good meeting with Netanyahu. And the reason why is Israel wants to import Indian labor to rebuild Israel after this war. Sorry. Yeah.
So Israel also. So this is the thing that no one is talking about, is that Israel also wants the United States out of the Middle East. They want
Yes.
they want to destroy CENTCOM, correct?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so if you know this and I know this, how in the hell does Pete Hegseth not know this, or Donald Trump not know this, or Tulsi Gabbard not know this? How does the news stations not know? How does no one else is talking about this, that Israel actually wants us to get out of the Middle East so they could be the superpower there? How does nobody know this?
Okay, so there are different reasons. Okay, the first, of course, is hubris, where America believes it is invincible, that it will eventually triumph in Iran. And honestly, the people in Washington live in an echo chamber, right? So they don't watch your show, they don't watch Tucker Carlson, they just listen to New York Times, to CNN. And these talking heads just tell them exactly what they want to hear, right? This is the boomer generation, okay? So number one is hubris. Second issue is eschatology, where the American government is infiltrated by Christian Zionists, by Freemasons, by people loyal to Israel, Zionists, right? And they control the levers of power, and so they can dictate policy, even though it's bad politics, okay? That's number two. Number three is that for the longest time, Israel was the pit bull of America in the Middle East. In fact, if you go back to the creation of Israel in 1948, and then before that, the Balfour Declaration, it seemed as though the British created Israel as a forward base for the Anglo-American Empire, right? Because Israel was essentially a settled colony of white Europeans in the Arab world, and the point of Israel was to create as much instability as possible in the Middle East, and it served its function really, really well. And so for the longest time, Israel just served the interests of empire. And so empire today still believes that Israel is still useful. And what they don't recognize is that Israel has been plotting to replace the American empire for a very long time. You know, there's actually a YouTube clip. You can go on YouTube and watch this. But, you know, Netanyahu is walking up the stairs, and the journalist asks him, "Hey, Prime Minister, what do you have in your arm? What are you reading right now?" And the book is called Rome versus the Jews by Barry Strauss. Okay, so it goes back to about 70 AD, when the Roman Empire was trying to crush a Jewish revolt. And the journalist asked Netanyahu, "Why are you reading this book?" And Netanyahu's response was, "Because it did not go well the first time. Because it did not go well the first time." Who is Rome today?
That would
Right?
be us.
Not Iran.
Is that us?
Probably not Iran, okay? Probably not Russia. Yeah, probably the United States, okay? So he's saying that eventually we're going to come into conflict with America, and we need to prepare, right? It didn't go well the first time. We need to make sure this time we win.
I just am, just flummoxed that we know this stuff, but somehow the people in power seem to not know this stuff. Donald Trump doesn't seem to know it, and again, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, maybe they do. Maybe you're right. Maybe they're completely controlled by the Freemasons and the Shabbat Lubavitch and all those things. And so here's the thing. I saw you explain this, that the reason why this war will crash our economy is because our economy, our stock market, is propped up by all the money that the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and UAE and Qatar and so forth, they invest into our AI here, and that is propping up our stock market. And so now, because of this war, the Strait of Hormuz is closed and they can't make any money. Plus they're being bombed by Iran. And so people are fleeing places like Dubai, and it's not going to be an economic center anymore. And so that money will get pulled out of our stock market. It's going to crash our economy. How in the hell is the United States going to institute a draft in the middle of a depression that is probably going to be worse than the 30s? And and then also fight a war for 10 years in the middle of a Great Depression with our dollar being complete. The whole point of us having the biggest military in the world is because we're the reserve currency in the world, and we can just keep printing money and making more, bombs and armaments. But as soon as that goes away, we don't have that ability anymore. So how could there possibly be a 10-year war? How could we even do ground troops? Because our economy is going to be tanking by the time that happens. Am I wrong about this?
Right. So I think the idea is that when people are desperate, they are most likely to be afraid and therefore most likely to be obedient. So if you crash the economy and people don't have any savings, people don't have any hope, it's much easier to draft them, right? Because if you have some money sitting in the bank and you have a pretty nice life, you're not going to want to go fight a war overseas, right? So remember, if America had entered World War II in 1930s, most Americans wouldn't go. But America entered World War II in 1941, and this is like 10 years of Great Depression when people couldn't find any work, when people didn't have enough food to eat, when people had to roam the country looking for any subsistence, right? So you want to create as much fear, anxiety as possible in America in order to force them to go fight a war that they don't want to fight. Now, I agree with you that this plan won't work, but they don't know that. Okay, I'm sorry. I mean, like obviously that they live in a different reality than we do. You know, we have a more objective sense of what's going on. But if you're in Washington, D.C., all you care about is obtaining more power, climbing that political ladder. And so you just do what you're told. And unfortunately, people who go to Washington, D.C. don't have their own ideas. So if you have an idea, and these secret societies do have their own ideas, these occultists have their own eschatology, then you just do what you're told. And this leads to national suicide. And that's exactly what's happening in America today.
So is this 100% chance that you give this, or is this a 50% chance? What would you put on it?
Look, I just engage in intellectual speculation. I have no concrete evidence to work from. I don't even know any of the players, right? But what I'm saying is that you just look at the past 10 years and you ask yourself why they're happening. Well, they fit into an eschatological script, including COVID, including this war in Ukraine, including the election of Donald Trump. It seems to fit into a script. And so you just extrapolate outwards and you're able to figure out, okay, what their plan, what the plan is next 5-10 years, okay? But I myself don't have any concrete evidence that any of this will turn out. And quite honestly, I have 3 young kids. So I hope none of this turns out. I hope that Donald Trump tomorrow wakes up and says, you know what, I made a terrible mistake. We need to get out of the Middle East as soon as possible. We need to focus on ensuring that African Americans can live a decent life. Screw the world. Let's do America first. You know, he has this come to Jesus moment, okay? I hope to God that happens. Is that likely? Probably not.
So okay. So what should a regular person do who's in the United States? So how is there any way to so when this economic crash happens, that's it. Everybody just loses all their money. What should people do? Is there a way to protect yourself, do you think?
Right. So, part of this eschatological plan requires depopulation, as you point out earlier. They do plan to kill a lot of people, and when I mean a lot of people, I mean like over 90% of humanity will be killed over the next 20 years. Okay, that is part of the wider divine plan, and I think that most people who die will be because they refuse to wake up to reality, because they refuse to understand the larger picture in place. So I think one thing that's really important is for people to have the courage to admit that the world is changing and to have the faith that things will turn out for the better. So basically knowledge, keep yourself informed. And that's why shows like yours is so important, right? Because during COVID, you were actually telling people the truth. when most people didn't want to hear the truth. Okay, so most people who die will be because they lack the courage to see the truth for what it is. That's number one. Number two is that money is the great Satan of this world. It's a great illusion. Money is the mechanism by which they control you. And what you need to recognize is that true wealth is your spirituality. True wealth is your empathy, your humanity, your consciousness. So focus on building strong relations with people around you and just accept the fact that your money is not going to be worth that much in a year or two. That vacation you have planned for the Maldives in spring of next year, it's not going to happen anymore. Okay, just give up these material obsessions and focus on things that make you happy, which is family, friends, purpose, spirituality, creativity. These things make you happy, and you should focus on these things. Be kind, be generous to your neighbors, because in the future, it's these neighbors that may save your life. And the third thing I will say is spirituality is what's really important. You know, Tucker Carlson, he says this a lot, but what's going to happen is a spiritual war, and it is true. You know, there will be lots of these geopolitical wars, but the war that really matters is a war for your heart, the war for your faith, for your soul. And if you just focus on being optimistic, then I guarantee you will survive the coming apocalypse. Okay, but again, it's your choice. It's always your choice. Free will is the divine principle of the universe. You have to choose to be free. You have to choose to be brave. You have to choose to live. And so whatever happens will depend a lot on personal choice.